Now that my son was gone, my daughter-in-law leaned close enough for me to feel her breath against my ear and whispered, loud enough for the people behind us to hear, "I'm not taking care of that old witch." A few heads turned. No one said anything. Neither did I. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I want to know how far my story travels. The church smelled of lilies and furniture polish. The kind of heavy, sweet scent that tries to mask grief but only makes it thicker. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, scattering pale blues and reds across the polished wooden pews. My son's casket rested at the front, draped in white flowers he would have said were too fancy for a regular guy. Ethan was 39 years old. 39. I kept repeating the number in my head like it might start making sense if I said it enough times. I stood beside the front pew, my black gloves folded carefully over my purse. I had chosen the simplest dress I owned, long sleeves, modest neckline. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I thought they would tremble. Beside me stood my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. Her mascara was perfectly applied. Her black dress hugged her frame like she was attending a gala instead of burying her husband. Every few minutes, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, careful not to smudge anything. When she leaned in and said those words, her voice was low but sharp. "I'm not taking care of that old witch. I didn't sign up for this." She straightened immediately afterward, pressing the tissue to her eyes as if she had just whispered a prayer. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. But then I saw the woman 2 rows behind us glance at me. Pity. Discomfort. That tight, polite expression people wear when they pretend not to hear something cruel. So I knew I hadn't imagined it. I looked at my son's casket instead. The mahogany finish gleamed under the church lights. I remembered when Ethan was 12 and insisted on sanding down our old kitchen table himself. He'd worked for hours, hands blistered, proud of every uneven stroke. He used to say, "Mom, I'll always take care of you." That promise echoed louder then. Vanessa's whisper. The pastor began to speak about Ethan's kindness, his generosity, his loyalty to family. Loyalty. The word landed heavily. Vanessa reached for Ethan's brother's hand, my younger son, Caleb, and squeezed it dramatically. Caleb stared straight ahead. He hadn't cried yet. Not once. His jaw was locked tight, like he was holding something back, or holding something in. When it was time for family to stand and say a few words, Vanessa went first. She spoke beautifully. About love. About partnership. About how Ethan had been her rock. "I don't know how I'll survive without him," she said, her voice cracking at precisely the right moment. People sniffled around us. I kept my face calm, because I knew something they didn't. After the service, we gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and casseroles. That's what people do in our town in Ohio. They bring aluminum trays of baked ziti and green bean casserole, whisper condolences, and promise to check in soon. Vanessa stayed near the center of the room, accepting hugs like a dignitary. I stood off to the side, near the window. The February sky was gray and low, threatening snow. I watched a thin layer of frost cling to the edges of the parking lot. I felt cold, but not because of the weather. I overheard her again. "She'll have to figure something out," Vanessa murmured to her friend Tiffany near the coffee urn. "I can't have her living with us." Ethan handled her bills. I don't even know what she expects now. Her tone wasn't grieving. It was inconvenienced. Tiffany gave a small, awkward laugh. "Well, maybe she has savings." Vanessa shrugged. "Not enough." I wrapped my gloved hands tighter around my purse. Ethan had handled my bills because he insisted. After my husband passed 3 years ago, Ethan set up automatic payments, organized my insurance, even installed one of those smart thermostats I never quite figured out. "Mom, you've done enough your whole life," he told me back then. "Let me do this." Vanessa never liked that. She used to joke, smiling, always smiling. "Careful, Ethan. Your mom might get too comfortable." I thought it was harmless teasing. I was wrong. Caleb approached me slowly. "You okay, Mom?" His voice was careful, measured. "I'm fine," I said. He hesitated, glancing toward Vanessa. "You're coming back to the house after this, right?" The house. Ethan and Vanessa's house. The one with the wide front porch and the maple tree Ethan planted the year they moved in. "I suppose so," I answered. Caleb nodded, but didn't look convinced. Vanessa appeared at his side almost instantly, like she had been watching us. "Of course she is," she said brightly. "We'll all go together. Family, family." She slipped her arm through Caleb's, and steered him away before he could respond. I stayed by the window a little longer. I remembered the last conversation I had with Ethan in the hospital. Machines humming. The faint antiseptic smell in the air. He looked smaller in that bed. Not like my boy who used to carry me across puddles when I wore heels to church. "Mom," he whispered, squeezing my hand weakly. "Promise me you won't let anyone push you around." I smiled at him then. Who would dare? He didn't smile back. Now, standing in that fellowship hall, Vanessa's words replayed in my mind. Old witch. I had been many things in my 68 years. A wife. A mother. A Sunday school teacher. A bookkeeper at a small hardware store for over 2 decades. But never invisible. Until now. When we finally drove back to the house, Vanessa rode in the front passenger seat of Caleb's SUV. I sat in the back, alone. Snow began to fall lightly, dusting the windshield. The house looked exactly the same as it had the week before. Only Ethan wasn't standing on the porch waiting for us. Inside, the air felt different. Still, unsettled. Vanessa kicked off her heels near the entryway and exhaled dramatically. I'm exhausted. She didn't look at me. Caleb lingered by the doorway. I can stay for a bit, he offered. That's not necessary. Vanessa replied quickly. We'll manage. We'll manage. Not we'll help Mom. Not we'll figure this out together. Just manage. I walked slowly into the living room. Ethan's favorite recliner sat by the fireplace. A folded blanket rested over the arm, exactly where he'd left it before going to the hospital. Vanessa followed me in. We should probably talk logistics, she said, crossing her arms. There's a lot to figure out. I turned to face her. Her expression had changed. The softness from the church was gone. In its place was something sharp. Calculating. I don't expect you to take care of me, I said quietly. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. Well, good, she replied after a pause. Because I can't. I nodded once. The snow outside began to fall harder, tapping gently against the windows. For the first time that day, I felt something steady settle inside me. Not anger. Not even grief. Clarity. Ethan had told me not to let anyone push me around. Vanessa thought I was alone now. She thought losing my son had made me weak. She had no idea what Ethan had done before he died. And I wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. The house was too quiet that night. After Caleb left and the casseroles were stacked in the refrigerator, after the last sympathy text buzzed and went unanswered, it was just the two of us. Vanessa in the master bedroom. Me in the small guest room at the end of the hallway. The hallway light stayed on. Ethan used to turn it off every night before bed. No need to waste electricity, Mom, he'd say, grinning as he reached for the switch. That light stayed on until almost midnight. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, still wearing my black dress. I hadn't changed. I didn't feel like I belonged to any room in that house anymore. The air felt different. Not sad. Occupied. Like I was already a visitor. I'm glad you're still here with me. Stay until the end. Things don't always unfold the way people expect. From the living room, I could hear Vanessa on the phone. Her voice wasn't soft. I know, Tiffany. I just didn't expect this. Ethan handled everything for her. Bills, insurance, all of it. I don't even know what account she has access to. A pause. No, she doesn't have much. The house is in Ethan's name. Another pause. I'll have to meet with the lawyer this week. The lawyer. She didn't say our lawyer. She said the lawyer. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the closed guest room door. 3 years ago, when my husband passed, I thought losing him would be the hardest thing I ever endured. But there is something uniquely hollow about losing a child. It rearranges your insides. It makes the world tilt slightly off-center. And yet, what hurt more in that moment wasn't just Ethan's absence. It was hearing myself reduced to a problem. The next morning, I woke. Early. Habit. I've been waking up at 5:30 a.m. for the last 40 years. First to pack school lunches. Then to brew coffee before work. Then just because my body didn't know how to sleep in. The kitchen felt unfamiliar. Vanessa's coffee machine beeped loudly as it brewed. Ethan used to prefer a simple drip pot. He said fancy machines were just more buttons to break. I poured myself a cup and sat at the small breakfast table near the window. Snow covered the backyard in a smooth, white sheet. The maple tree stood bare and still. Vanessa walked in 20 minutes later, already dressed. Not in black this time. In leggings and a fitted sweater. She stopped when she saw me. Oh, you're up. I've always been up early, I said. She opened the fridge, scanning the shelves. We should probably start sorting through things today. Things? I asked. She shut the fridge a little too hard. Ethan's office. His files. Accounts. I need to understand what we're dealing with. I noticed she didn't say what you're dealing with. I can help, I offered calmly. She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. That's okay. It might be overwhelming for you. Overwhelming. I nodded slowly. I managed your father-in-law's bookkeeping for 27 years. She gave a tight smile. This is different. Of course it was. By noon, she had spread papers across the dining table. Bank statements. Insurance forms. Mortgage documents. I recognized Ethan's neat handwriting in the margins of a few folders. Vanessa moved quickly, flipping pages, making notes on her phone. Then she stopped. What's this? She muttered. I stayed seated on the couch, watching quietly. She held up a folder labeled in Ethan's handwriting. Personal, Mom. My name wasn't written. Just Mom. She glanced at me, then opened it. Inside were copies of utility bills, a small life insurance policy from my late husband, and a separate envelope. She didn't open the envelope. Instead, she slid the entire folder aside. That's probably just old paperwork, she said too quickly. I said nothing. Around 3 in the afternoon, her tone shifted. The mortgage still has 20 years left, she said, almost to herself. Without Ethan's income, this is going to be tight. She looked at me then, directly. I'll need to make some changes. What kind of changes? I asked. She folded her arms. Well, for starters, we can't have extra expenses. Extra. I waited. It might make sense for you to consider other arrangements, she continued carefully. Maybe a senior community. Somewhere with activities. People your own age. There it was. Not even 24 hours after we buried my son. I see, I said. She exhaled, relieved I wasn't arguing. It would just be practical. Practical. I looked around the living room. At Ethan's boots by the door. At the photo of him holding Vanessa on their wedding day. At the throw pillow he always complained about because it was too decorative to be useful. I won't be a burden, I said quietly. She didn't correct me. That evening, Caleb stopped by again. He looked between us, sensing the shift. You okay, Mom? He asked for the second time in 2 days. I'm fine, I answered again. Vanessa spoke before he could continue. We're just discussing logistics. Caleb's jaw tightened. What logistics? Mom might explore some independent living options, Vanessa said smoothly. Caleb looked at me, confused. Already. I gave him a small, steady smile. We're just talking. But inside, something was settling into place. Vanessa believed I was dependent. She believed Ethan had been my only support. She believed the house, the accounts, the future, all of it, now flowed through her. She didn't know about the envelope in that folder. She didn't know about the meeting Ethan and I had 3 months before the accident. And she certainly didn't know what would happen when we sat down with the lawyer. I took a slow sip of my tea that night and watched the snow fall again outside the window. Vanessa thought she was planning my exit. She had no idea she was walking into something Ethan had prepared long before he was gone. The next 2 days passed like that. Quiet on the surface, sharp underneath. Vanessa moved through the house with a kind of restless energy. Opening drawers, sorting through mail, logging into accounts on Ethan's laptop. Every so often, I would hear her sigh. Not the sound of someone grieving. The sound of someone calculating. I stayed mostly in the background. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. I wiped down already clean counters. I made soup no one touched. I have learned something in my 68 years. When people underestimate you, silence is a powerful place to stand. On Wednesday morning, I noticed something small. The code on the garage door didn't work. I stood there in the cold for a moment, pressing the same 4 numbers Ethan had chosen the year they moved in. His birthday. It had always made him laugh. Mom, no one's going to guess that, he said. Now the keypad blinked red. Vanessa opened the door from inside. Oh, she said lightly. I updated the security settings. Just being cautious. Cautious. Of course, I replied. Later that afternoon, I walked past Ethan's office and found the door closed. It had never been closed before. Even when he worked late, he left it cracked open. I knocked gently. Vanessa opened it only halfway. Yes. I was looking for the property tax folder, I said. Her eyes flickered. I've got it handled. I've paid property taxes before, I reminded her. This is different, she said again. That phrase was becoming her favorite. That evening, Caleb called me. Mom, he said quietly. Vanessa mentioned something about you moving. She mentioned options, I answered carefully. He was silent for a second. That seems fast. Grief makes people move quickly, I said. Sometimes too quickly. I didn't want to pull him into the middle. Not yet. After dinner, when Vanessa went upstairs to shower, I walked back to the dining table where she had left a few folders stacked neatly. The one labeled personal, Mom, was gone. But the envelope had not been inside when she closed it, because I had already moved it. It was now tucked safely inside my purse, between my checkbook and a small photograph of Ethan at age 6, missing his 2 front teeth and grinning at the world like it belonged to him. I ran my fingers over the sealed edge of that envelope. 3 months before the accident, Ethan had driven me to an office downtown, a quiet building with frosted glass doors and a brass plaque beside the entrance. Just routine, he had said. It hadn't been routine, and Vanessa had not been invited. Upstairs, I heard water running through the pipes. Vanessa thought changing a garage code meant control. She thought closing a door meant authority. She thought I was alone. I sat down in Ethan's recliner for the first time since the funeral and let the silence settle around me. She called me a witch. She forgot something important. Witches don't panic. They wait. The meeting had been on a Tuesday. I remember because Ethan insisted on taking the day off work, and he rarely did that. He picked me up at 9 in the morning, coffee in hand, like it was any other errand. Mom, he said as we drove downtown, I need you to trust me. I've trusted you since you learned to walk, I replied. He smiled at that, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The law office was quiet. Neutral walls. Framed certificates. The kind of place where voices stay low even when no one asks them to. A man in his late 50s introduced himself as Mr. Harlan. Firm handshake. Direct eye contact. Vanessa's name was never mentioned. We sat at a polished wooden table while Mr. Harlan explained documents in steady, measured tones. Ethan listened carefully. Asked questions. Clarified wording. I don't want there to be confusion, Ethan said at one point. Or pressure. Pressure. He glanced at me when he said that. I didn't fully understand everything that morning. Legal language has a way of wrapping itself around simple truths. But I understood enough. Ethan was putting protections in place. Not because he didn't trust his wife, but because he knew her. Back in the present, I sat in his recliner and replayed that day in my mind. Upstairs, the shower shut off. Pipes rattled softly in the walls. Vanessa had started moving through the house differently, opening closets, measuring spaces with her eyes. Yesterday, I noticed a stack of real estate brochures on the kitchen counter. Just curious, she had said when she saw me looking. Curious about downsizing, about refinancing, about liquid options. She spoke about the house as if Ethan had already faded from it. That evening, she brought up the lawyer again. I scheduled a consultation for Friday, she said casually while scrolling through her phone. To review everything. Everything, I asked. Assets, liabilities, the structure of ownership. Ownership. I nodded slowly. That sounds wise. She studied me for a second, like she was trying to read something behind my expression. You'll need to be there, she added. Since Ethan handled some of your accounts. I'll be there, I said. She seemed satisfied. But later that night, as I stood in the guest room folding my black dress carefully over a hanger, I thought about Ethan's face in that law office. I don't want Mom put in a corner, he had said firmly. If anything happens to me, she stays secure. Secure. Vanessa believed security came from control, from codes, from folders, from being first to the lawyer's office. She didn't know there were documents she had never seen. She didn't know that the envelope in my purse wasn't just paperwork. It was clarity. Friday was coming. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something steady inside me. Not hope. Not revenge. Preparation. Friday arrived cold and clear. Vanessa dressed like she was going to a job interview. Structured coat. Hair pulled back tight. A leather folder tucked neatly under her arm. I wore a simple navy sweater and pressed slacks. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like a battle uniform. We drove separately. She left 10 minutes before me. I watched her car disappear down the street from the front window. Then I walked back to the guest room, opened my purse, and checked the envelope one more time. Still sealed. Still steady in my hands. I don't want Mom put in a corner. Ethan's voice felt close that morning. Mr. Harlan's office looked the same as it had 3 months ago. Quiet. Controlled. Neutral. The receptionist gave me a polite nod of recognition. Vanessa was already seated when I walked into the conference room. She looked surprised. I thought you might ride with me, she said. I like to take my time, I replied calmly. Mr. Harlan entered with a thin stack of documents and a tablet in his hand. He shook Vanessa's hand first, then mine. Mrs. Whitaker, he said gently to me, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, I answered. Vanessa cleared her throat. We'd like to review the estate structure and discuss next steps. Efficient. Direct. Mr. Harlan nodded and opened the file. As you know, Ethan updated several documents in November. Vanessa blinked once. Updated. Yes, he continued smoothly. He made adjustments to beneficiary designations, property protections, and living arrangements. Living arrangements. I folded my hands in my lap and kept my expression neutral. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. I wasn't aware of any updates. Mr. Harlan gave her a measured look. Ethan requested privacy during that consultation. The air in the room shifted. Vanessa's jaw tightened. What kind of protections? Mr. Harlan turned a page. The home remains in a protected trust. It cannot be sold, refinanced, or leveraged without dual authorization. Dual? Vanessa asked sharply. Yes. Both you and Mrs. Whitaker. She turned toward me slowly. I met her eyes without flinching. Mr. Harlan continued. Additionally, Ethan established a separate living security fund in Mrs. Whitaker's name. It covers housing, medical expenses, and a monthly stipend. The word stipend seemed to echo. Vanessa's voice lost its polish. How much? Mr. Harlan quoted the number. It was more than enough. Silence filled the room. I didn't look at Vanessa. I looked at the polished surface of the conference table and saw Ethan at 12 years old, sanding that kitchen table until his arms ached. He had always been thorough. There's one more clause, Mr. Harlan added carefully. In the event that Mrs. Whitaker is pressured, displaced, or denied reasonable accommodation, the trust structure automatically shifts majority control to her. Vanessa's chair made a small scraping sound against the floor. That's ridiculous, she said under her breath. No, Mr. Harlan replied calmly. It's specific. Specific. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward me. For the first time since the funeral, she wasn't calculating. She was recalculating. I reached into my purse slowly and placed the sealed envelope on the table. I believe this belongs in the file as well, I said. Mr. Harlan gave a small nod of recognition. Vanessa stared at the envelope like it had just started breathing. She had changed the garage code. She had closed doors. She had spoken about senior communities before the ground on my son's grave had fully settled. But Ethan had not left me unguarded. Vanessa called me a witch. She should have checked the paperwork first. Vanessa didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. She gathered her folder slowly, her movements no longer sharp and confident. The air around her had changed. It wasn't authority anymore. It was containment. When we stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, she finally turned to me. You knew, she said. It wasn't a question. I trusted my son, I replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't tell me any of this. That was his choice. For a moment, I thought she might argue, raise her voice, accuse me of manipulation. Instead, she looked away. I was just trying to be practical, she said, her tone thinner now. Practical would have included me in the conversation, I answered calmly. She inhaled sharply, then walked toward her car without another word. I stood on the sidewalk for a second longer. The sky was pale blue, winter light stretching thin across the parking lot. I felt something settle inside me. Not victory. Balance. When I returned to the house, Vanessa was already there. She had beaten me home and was pacing in the living room, phone in hand. Caleb was sitting on the couch. He looked up as I walked in. Mom, I'm fine, I said. Vanessa stopped pacing. Caleb, you didn't know about this either? Caleb frowned. About what? The trust. The dual authorization. The stipend. He looked at me slowly. Ethan mentioned he was organizing things. He didn't give details. Vanessa let out a short laugh. Not amused. Just unsettled. So I'm just locked out of decisions now. No, I said evenly. You're included. Just not alone. That landed. Caleb stood up. That seems fair. Vanessa shot him a look, but he didn't back down. The room grew quiet. I walked over to the fireplace and adjusted the framed photo of Ethan. It had tilted slightly to one side. He wanted stability, I said softly. For all of us. Vanessa crossed her arms. And what does that mean now? It means, I replied, turning to face her, no one is being pushed out. The words hung there. No one is being pushed out. She understood exactly what I meant. That evening, the house felt different again. Not hostile, not warm, just recalibrated. Vanessa stayed mostly upstairs. Caleb lingered longer than usual. Before he left, he squeezed my shoulder gently. "I'm glad he thought ahead," he said. "So am I answered. After everyone had gone quiet, I sat once more in Ethan's recliner. 3 days ago, I had been a problem to solve. An extra expense. A burden. Now the structure of the house itself had shifted. Not because I argued. Not because I fought. But because my son had known something important. Grief exposes people. And Vanessa had shown her hand too soon. The weekend felt different. Vanessa stopped talking about options. She stopped mentioning senior communities, stopped leaving brochures on the counter. The stack had disappeared entirely. In its place sat a neat bowl of fruit, like nothing had ever been there. But silence can say more than words. On Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her standing at the sink, staring out at the snow-covered yard. She didn't turn when she spoke. "So what now?" It wasn't defiant. It was uncertain. "We grieve," I said, "and we respect what Ethan put in place." She exhaled slowly. "I never planned to push you out. I let that sit between us." "You changed the garage code," I said gently. She didn't answer. "You talked about senior living the day after the funeral." Her shoulders tightened. "I panicked," she said. Everything felt unstable. Unstable. I thought about the way she had whispered at the church. The way she had spoken to Tiffany near the coffee urn. Panic doesn't usually sound like calculation. But I didn't argue. Later that afternoon, Caleb came by again. He brought groceries this time. Simple things. Bread, soup, coffee. He set them on the counter and looked between us carefully. "How are we doing?" he asked. "We're adjusting," I answered. Vanessa gave a short nod. Caleb cleared his throat. "Ethan told me once that he didn't want either of you to feel cornered." That was his word. Cornered. The same word Ethan had used in Mr. Harlan's office. Vanessa looked down at the countertop. "I didn't know he felt that way," she said quietly. "Maybe he didn't feel it," I replied. "Maybe he just prepared for it." That night, something shifted again. Vanessa knocked on the guest room door before coming in. She hadn't done that all week. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we should sit down and go through everything together. The accounts. The trust. All of it. Together." It was the first time she used that word without hesitation. "I'd like that," I answered. She hesitated at the doorway. I didn't mean what I said. At the funeral, the air grew still. "You were grieving," I said calmly. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. Searching. I didn't give her more than that. Because apologies spoken under pressure are not the same as understanding. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Ethan again. He hadn't written those clauses out of suspicion alone. He had written them because he understood human nature. Loss changes people. Money tests them. Fear exposes them. Vanessa had shown who she was when she thought I was powerless. Now she was showing something else. Whether it was growth or caution, I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving that house. Not because of paperwork. Not because of pride. But because my son had built a structure that protected both of us, even from ourselves. And this time, I intended to stay exactly where I belonged. The following week moved more slowly. Not softer, just slower. Vanessa kept her word. On Monday evening, she brought a stack of documents to the dining table and asked me to sit with her. Caleb joined us, quiet but attentive. We went line by line. Mortgage statements, insurance policies, utility accounts, the protected trust documents Mr. Harlan had outlined. Vanessa's tone stayed measured. Professional, almost careful. But every now and then, I caught something in her expression, not resentment anymore. Recognition. "This clause," she said at one point, tapping the paper lightly, "about displacement triggering majority control." He was serious about that. "Yes," I replied. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Ethan didn't like imbalance. That was true. When he was 10 years old, he once split a candy bar into 3 pieces and made sure his brother and I each chose before he did. "Fair is fair," he had said. Now fairness was written in legal language. After we finished reviewing the documents, Vanessa sat quietly for a moment. "I didn't realize how much he planned," she admitted. "He planned because he cared," I said. There was no accusation in my voice. Just fact. That night, something subtle shifted in the house. Vanessa cooked dinner. Nothing elaborate. Just roasted chicken and rice. She set 3 plates instead of 2. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't need to. Later, As we cleared the dishes, she hesitated. I was scared, she said quietly, without looking at me. After the funeral, everything felt like it was falling apart. It was, I answered. She nodded. I thought I had to secure everything quickly, she continued. I didn't think about how that would feel to you. I dried a plate slowly with a kitchen towel. Grief makes people grab for control, I said. Sometimes we grab too hard. She gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. And the whisper? I asked gently. Her shoulders stiffened. I regret that, she said. I wasn't thinking. No, she had been thinking very clearly. But I let that pass. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about what happened next. Over the next few days, Vanessa stopped closing Ethan's office door. She left it slightly open again, the way he used to. The garage code was changed back. She didn't announce it. I simply noticed when the keypad turned green instead of red. Small things matter. On Thursday afternoon, I stood by the maple tree in the backyard, brushing snow off one of the lower branches. Vanessa joined me outside. It feels different, she said, looking at the house. It is, I replied. She glanced at me. You're not leaving. It wasn't a question this time. No, I said calmly. She nodded once. And for the first time since the funeral, there was no tension in that exchange. Ethan had built something stronger than fear. He had built structure. He had built balance. And as the snow slowly melted from the yard, I realized something else. Vanessa hadn't just been confronted by paperwork. She had been confronted by herself. And sometimes, that is the harder thing to face. By the second week after the funeral, the casseroles were gone. So were most of the sympathy calls. Grief, I've learned, has an expiration date for everyone except the one who carries it. The house had settled into a new rhythm. Not the old one. That would never return. But something steadier than those first sharp days. Vanessa started working from home more often. I could hear her on conference calls in the office, her voice professional and composed. If someone listening didn't know better, they would think everything in her world was perfectly intact. But grief leaves hairline cracks. And so does confrontation. One afternoon, Caleb stopped by again. He brought a small wooden box with him. I found this in Ethan's storage unit, he said, placing it carefully on the dining table. Vanessa looked up from her laptop. Storage unit? He rented one last year, Caleb replied. Mostly old tools. Some personal things. He opened the box slowly. Inside were old photographs, baseball trophies, a few handwritten notebooks. I reached out and picked up one of the notebooks. It was Ethan's handwriting. Small, neat, intentional. Vanessa leaned closer. What is that? Looks like planning notes, Caleb said quietly. I flipped through a few pages. Lists, insurance references, account numbers, and then a section titled simply, Mom. Not emotional, not dramatic, just organized. There were bullet points. Ensure housing stability. Prevent unilateral sale. Avoid conflict between V and Mom. Fair structure. Clear boundaries. Clear boundaries. Vanessa went very still. I didn't know he was writing things down like this, she murmured. He was thorough, I said. Caleb glanced between us. He worried about tension. He said he didn't want either of you feeling displaced. The word landed again. Displaced. Vanessa swallowed. I never wanted to displace anyone. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I turned another page. At the bottom of one sheet, Ethan had written something in slightly larger letters. Fair doesn't mean equal. It means secure. I closed the notebook gently. For a moment, no one spoke. The house felt quieter than usual, even though all three of us were sitting there. Vanessa finally looked at me. I think I was afraid, she said softly. Of losing control. Of losing everything. You did lose something, I replied. We both did. Her eyes glistened briefly, but she didn't cry. Neither did I. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Ethan trusted both of you. That's why he built it this way. Built. That word mattered. Ethan hadn't just left assets. He had left architecture. Structure that forced balance. Structure that prevented panic from turning into damage. That evening, after Caleb left with the empty box, Vanessa stood at the kitchen sink again, staring out at the yard. I thought I was protecting myself, she said without turning around. Sometimes protection looks like control, I answered. And sometimes control looks like fear, she added quietly. I nodded. We stood there in silence. Not enemies. Not friends. Just two women standing inside the framework a man had carefully built before he was gone. Vanessa had whispered that she wouldn't take care of me. She thought I was a burden. What she hadn't understood then was this. I was never something to manage. I was part of the foundation. And foundations don't move just because someone panics. By the third week, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place adjusting to weight redistribution. Grief had not lessened. It had simply settled into the walls. Vanessa began spending more time at the dining table instead of isolating herself in Ethan's office. She asked practical questions now, not about selling or relocating, but about maintenance schedules, property taxes, and the maple tree that needed trimming before spring. Small things. But small things reveal direction. One evening, she approached me while I was folding laundry in the guest room. "I've been reviewing the trust language again," she said. I looked up, and there's a clause about decision mediation. If we disagree on a major financial move, it requires a third-party review. "Yes," I answered. Ethan wanted safeguards. She nodded slowly. He didn't trust emotion under stress. "That's wise," I said. She hesitated at the doorway. "I was emotional," she admitted. "More than I realized." I folded a sweater carefully before responding. "You were frightened," I said. "And fear makes people reach." She didn't argue. Later that night, she brought something unexpected to the table. "I'd like to adjust the guest room," she said. "If you're staying long-term." I met her eyes calmly. "I am." She gave a small nod. "Then it shouldn't feel temporary." That word mattered. Temporary. The room had felt that way from the beginning, like I was waiting to be phased out. The following Saturday, Caleb came by with a toolbox. Vanessa had asked him to install shelves in the guest room closet and change the curtains. I stood back and watched them work together. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but cooperatively. At one point, Caleb looked at his sister-in-law and said quietly, "Ethan would have liked this." Vanessa paused, screwdriver in hand. "I hope so," she replied. Hope is different from control. That afternoon, Vanessa asked if I would join her for a walk around the neighborhood. The snow had melted into thin patches, revealing damp earth underneath. As we walked, she spoke without looking at me. "I didn't grow up with stability," she said. "When things shift, I brace for impact." I listened. "I thought I had to secure everything fast," she continued, "before I lost more." "You weren't losing me," I said gently. She stopped walking for a moment. "I see that now." We resumed walking. No grand apology. No dramatic reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. When we returned to the house, I paused at the front porch and looked at the maple tree again. 3 weeks ago, I had stood in that church and heard myself reduced to an inconvenience. An expense. A burden. Now the structure Ethan built had done what it was designed to do. It slowed panic. It prevented displacement. It forced conversation instead of reaction. Vanessa hadn't changed because I argued. She changed because she encountered boundaries. Clear ones. The kind my son believed in. That evening, I sat in Ethan's recliner once more. The office door was open. The garage code worked. The guest room shelves were installed. Nothing dramatic. Nothing explosive. But stability had returned. Not because someone won, but because someone prepared. And preparation, I've learned, is a quiet kind of love. By the 4th week, people stopped bringing up the funeral. Life outside the house resumed its normal speed. Cars moved down the street. Mail arrived on schedule. The world, as it does, continued. Inside the house, something steadier had taken hold. Vanessa no longer moved like someone bracing for eviction or takeover. She moved like someone adjusting to coexistence. One evening, as we were reviewing a utility bill together, she paused. "I spoke to Tiffany," she said. I looked up from the paper. "Oh." I told her I overreacted. About everything. She didn't say which. She didn't need to. "That was responsible," I replied. She folded her hands on the table. "I've been thinking about that day. The funeral." Silence stretched between us. "I was angry," she continued. "At Ethan. At the situation. At losing control. And I let it come out wrong." "Words don't disappear," I said gently. "I know," she answered. That was the first time she didn't defend herself. Caleb came over later that night. He had started dropping by every few days, not out of suspicion anymore, but habit. We sat together in the living room, the 3 of us. It wasn't tense, just quiet. At one point, Caleb looked at Vanessa and said, "Ethan trusted you." She nodded slowly. "I know. And he trusted Mom," Caleb added. Another nod. Trust. That word had done more work than any argument could have. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Vanessa already brewing coffee in the old drip pot Ethan preferred. She glanced at me. I figured this one makes better coffee. I allowed myself the smallest smile. It does. Small gestures matter. That afternoon, she handed me a set of keys. The spare set, she said. Just in case. Just in case. Weeks earlier, the garage code had been changed without a word. Now keys were being handed back. Not because of fear. Because of acknowledgement. Later that day, I visited Ethan's grave alone. The ground had settled slightly. The flowers were fresher this time. I stood there quietly. He prepared. I said softly. You knew us both. The wind moved gently across the cemetery. Back at the house, Vanessa was in the kitchen when I returned. I scheduled grief counseling, she said. For both of us, if you'd like to come. It wasn't an order. It wasn't a strategy. It was an invitation. I'll consider it, I answered. That night, as I sat once again in Ethan's recliner, I realized something important. Vanessa had not become a different person overnight. She had been confronted with boundaries, with structure, with evidence of her husband's foresight. And instead of fighting it, she adjusted. Grief had exposed her first instinct, but structure had shaped her second. Weeks ago, I had been an inconvenience in her plan. Now I was part of the plan itself. Not because I demanded it, but because it was written that way from the beginning. Ethan understood something many people don't. Love isn't just affection. It's preparation. And preparation changes outcomes. It has been 2 months now. The maple tree in the backyard has started to bloom again. Small green buds where there was only snow the day we buried Ethan. Grief hasn't left. It doesn't pack its bags and disappear the way anger sometimes does. It lingers. It settles into quiet corners. It shows up in the grocery store when I reach for his favorite cereal out of habit. But the house no longer feels unstable. It feels anchored. Vanessa and I have found a rhythm. Not perfect. Not sentimental. Just real. We attend counseling together once a week. We sit in separate chairs, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. There are days she cries. There are days I do. There are days we simply listen. The guest room no longer looks temporary. My books are on the shelves Caleb installed. My quilt is folded neatly at the end of the bed. The spare keys hang on the hook by the door. Nothing dramatic changed, but everything shifted. One evening last week, Vanessa and I were sitting on the porch as the sun set behind the maple tree. The air smelled like early spring, damp earth, and something new trying to grow. I think I was afraid of losing control, she said, quietly. And when I feel that, I grab too tightly. I nodded. And I mistook your presence for pressure, she added. I let the silence sit between us before answering. I mistook your fear for cruelty, I said. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. I'm sorry, she said. This time it wasn't defensive. It wasn't cornered. It was clear. I know, I replied. Because now I did. The day of the funeral feels far away, but I still remember it. The lilies. The stained glass. Her whisper. I'm not taking care of that old witch. At the time, it cut sharply. But now I see something else in that moment. She wasn't whispering about me. She was whispering about responsibility. About fear. About a future she thought was slipping out of her hands. Ethan understood that about her. And he understood something about me, too. He knew I would not beg. He knew I would not fight. He knew I would wait. His preparation didn't just protect me financially. It forced us into honesty. It prevented panic from turning into permanent damage. Last Sunday, Caleb came over for dinner. We ate at the same dining table where, weeks earlier, documents had been spread out like battle plans. Now there were plates, laughter, quiet stories about Ethan. At one point, Vanessa raised her glass slightly. To structure, she said softly. Caleb smiled. To fairness. I added the final word. To preparation. Because that's what saved us. Not revenge. Not confrontation. Preparation. The house still holds Ethan's absence. But it also holds what he built. And every time I walk past that maple tree he planted, I think about something simple. Roots don't panic in storms. They hold. Vanessa once thought I was something to manage. An expense. A burden. Now she understands. I was never the weight in this house. I was part of its foundation. And foundations, when built well, don't crumble when fear tries to shake them.